Hi, AP Lang students. This is Mrs. Betcher. I've got some tips for you about your upcoming synthesis essay. Now that you have created the synthesis essay packet with your team, you are ready to sort of think of yourself as a person, as an expert on this issue because you've watched the documentary, you've read the sources. Now I'd like you to imagine you're sitting at a table with each of those writers who wrote the sources you researched, and you're kind of thinking, this is my panel of experts. These are the people that I'm going to cite in my essay, and I'm going to really weigh in on the issue, citing the best and brightest minds to support what I have to say. So this is the image I want you to keep in mind when you think of a synthesis essay, a compilation of many points of view, all supporting, all kind of weighing in and you support what you think. Okay, so the first reminder I'd like to give is about your introduction, because some students skip over it or they write a weak introduction and it's a bad start to the paper. So I want you to remember your options. You can do facts and statistics or the classic funnel or the description, imagery, or relevant quotation, but don't do a Webster's dictionary beginning. Don't use any cliches, and don't avoid an introduction altogether by just writing the thesis. Instead, you want to introduce me, contextualize your work. Remember that the facts and statistics all have keywords in the thesis. You start off with a lot of interesting things. You move to the thesis, which has the keywords highlighted. The funnel style brings everything down to a very sort of narrow, focused thesis. Description and imagery is my personal favorite because it's imaginative and it allows you to create that image that really grips the reader. And the relevant quotation. Oh, I should also say, I didn't say this in my what not to do, but don't ever start with a question. You can start with a quotation if it's relevant and you know it, but don't start with a question. Okay, so all introductions are always going to have an interesting lead, bridge to the thesis, and then keywords indicating the order of the body paragraphs. And as you know, I love for you to highlight them. Okay, next. When you think about organizing your body paragraphs, I want you to think, okay, you've got your 6 to 8 sources. You know you need to cite 3 of them for sure in your essay. Otherwise, you will only earn a C or lower. So you have to cite 3. There's a fatal error that students make, and they think, oh, I've got to have 3 sources, and I have 3 body paragraphs. I can just do this. I can have 1 source for my counter argument, 1 source for this paragraph, 1 source for this paragraph. Awesome. I've got it. And although I love this essay structure, what I'm concerned about is your essay looking something like this. Summary of the first source, summary of the second source, summary of the third source, conclusion. If I color-coded this essay structure, here's what it would look like. Do you see how blocky that essay looks? It looks like you're summarizing somebody else's work instead of weighing in and bringing yourself into the argument, bringing sources together and wrestling their ideas and finding a coherent idea between them. And so I really want you to avoid this style altogether. Do not allow yourself to summarize a single source in the paragraph. Instead, the requirement that I'm asking of you is to bring 2 sources together in the same paragraph, like this guy and this guy, for instance. First guy says, there's no doubt that X is the most important factor in the issue. And the second guy says, while you make a persuasive point about X, I would argue that evidence for Y is more compelling. You cite both of those in your paragraph and you explain your reasoning and which one you think is more valid. Or if they're 2 that agree with one another, then they will persuasively argue your point. But you cannot do an injustice to this diverse panel here by just, summarizing a single person. That would be incorrect. You bring them together and you represent the diversity of thought. Okay, about actually citing your sources, you know that we're an MLA citation, which means the author's last name is going to go in parentheses at the end of the sentence. I want you to remember when you introduce your quotes, though, some students prefer to put the author's last name at the beginning of the sentence, and they like to do this. According to, let's just use my last name as the source. Like, let's pretend I wrote the article. According to Betcher, quote, Betcher says, quote, as it says in Betcher. And the problem with this style is that, nobody knows me or my name. And actually, it becomes very disruptive to feel like there's all these sources that are thrown in the middle of your argument. If you're arguing persuasively about social media or nuclear power and you're interrupted by all of these last names that you don't recognize, it can be very jarring. So instead, I really like to introduce the speaker a little bit before I give his last name. So I like to introduce the speaker by his credentials. Look at your citation information and ask yourself, is this person a journalist because they're writing for a newspaper? Is this person a social worker? Is this person a college president or an educator or a doctor or a lawyer? It's very useful to first say something about the profession. Education professionals worry about the impact of school choice on diversity. Betcher, an educator in the such and such school system, argues persuasively, blah, 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 blah. So before you introduce my last name, you've contextualized it by saying educational professionals as a group feel this way. Here's one educational professional who you can believe, and here's the quotation. And it really builds the speaker's ethos. Finally, if you don't have any specific credentials to call on, and you should not just name drop the person in the middle of the argument. Instead, you can just put the source's last name in the parentheses like MLA citation suggests. Integration has long been a strategy of providing access to education. Quote, Betcher in parentheses. Okay, most important things to remember, guys. Your argument in your synthesis essay is foremost. You are thinking about what you want to say, and you're the one that's going to do most of the talking. You recognize the complexity of the issue by acknowledging the counterargument. You must use more than one source per paragraph. Otherwise, you risk summarizing what the sources say instead of advancing your own argument. You have to contextualize the issue in your intro, and you need to embed thoughtfully. Remember that when you embed this evidence, it really only ever has like half of the amount of the writing as your own reasoning. It's always 2-to-1 reasoning to evidence ratio. That's always really important. All right, you guys, I know you're going to do really well on this. I look forward to seeing your drafts that you start writing.